Welcome to the Center for Climate and Security's Climate and Security podcast. I am your host, Dr. Sweta Chakraborty. Regular listeners will know that twice a month we aim to bring you exclusive dialogues with the world's leading thinkers, educators, civil servants, and military personnel who work at the nexus of climate and security. I asked these experts to share with us their views and perspectives on how we can collectively prepare at this time of high consequence risk, particularly that of climate change. It is my pleasure today to speak with General Tom Middendorp, chair of the International Military Council on Climate and Security and former Chief of Defense of the Netherlands. General Middendorp has had an incredible career in the Dutch Army since joining in 1979 and retiring only in 2017. Also in 2017, he was appointed an honorary officer of the Order of Australia. And in 2018, King Willem-Alexander of the Netherlands appointed him as an adjutant in extraordinary service of the king. It is humbling to speak to this impressive career general on his views on planetary security. Tom, it is an absolute pleasure to have you here today on the Climate and Security podcast. Thank you so much for joining me and our listeners. And so we'd love to just kick off this conversation with you telling us a little bit about your experiences, your time in the Royal Netherlands Army, and what really did you learn from those experiences that then influenced your work that you're doing today?
Yeah, well, I've been in the military service for 40 years and I served my country and tried to keep my country safe from all kinds of threats. And I've learned that threats are very diverse, from terrorists to direct attacks to now even climate change as a threat. I've also learned that in tackling these threats, the military is not always the solution, but is part of a wider solution. So we need wider government approaches. And I've learned that in practice. I've been a commander in the south of Afghanistan, and I can give you an example where we have been fighting over a village for days. In the end, we won the fight against the Taliban. We drove them out, but we didn't solve the problem. The tensions were still there, and the Taliban was able to return. And after a year, we found out what the real problem was. And the real problem for the population was a dispute over the division of water. It's an agricultural country, there's not a lot of water, and so they were kind of fighting over that. And that fighting ground gave also ground to the Taliban to get settled. So we sent in some specialists, we sent in diplomats, water management experts, and they negotiated a solution. And from that moment on, the village was stable. We didn't have any problem anymore. And that kind of convinced me how powerful this cooperation with aid workers, with the diplomats, how powerful that can be on the ground. So not on the policy level also, but on the ground. And it can help avoid a lot of fighting and unnecessary casualties.
Wow, so you really saw firsthand that it's not just about necessarily seeking out that threat and annihilating it, it's also figuring out all the various layers that are there and how they all build on top of one another and then produce a much bigger picture than is not always seen immediately. And so you really need that cooperation and collaboration. So then how has that impacted some of the work that you're doing currently? Tell us a little bit about what you're working on now.
Well, it gave me two lessons learned. One is that we need to reach out to each other and not go through stovepipes, which is not easy to do. On a government level, the different departments are different stovepipes, and they sometimes even compete with each other. But we need to integrate that. We need to integrate our efforts on the policy level, but also on the operational level. And I think that that's a very important lesson. The second important lesson is that as a military, we have all kinds of sensors, all kinds of technologies to know what's going on, our intel systems, and to see what's happening. But what we see are symptoms of problems. And what we need is understanding why these problems are there. So the roots of the conflict. And the better you understand those roots of the conflict, the better you are able to address them more specifically. And addressing them specifically sometimes requires military action, sometimes civil action, sometimes a mix of those two. But the better you understand it, the better you can tailor your efforts and the better you can avoid unnecessary casualties. Of course, when the fight is needed, we will fight. But when it's not needed, let's not do it.
Exactly. And so it was examples like that through your military career that made it clear to you that there were other root causes than what was obvious?
Absolutely.
And then was that sort of what made you get into more climate-related issues post-military career? Was there was it just several different examples unique to you, things that you heard about from your colleagues also, or was there a light bulb that went off, or was this kind of accumulation of your experiences?
Yeah, it's a kind of accumulation. I've been in 20 different mission areas. And I saw, for instance, in Mali, where we built a huge camp, and then we are drilling water wells into the ground to get water. But with using that groundwater, we draw away the water of the local villages. So we only increased their problem. And we use a lot of fuel, lots of fossil fuels that need to be brought to the base. But that drove up the prices of fuel for the local population. So I also saw that our presence there has a lot of impacts. So the problem you are trying to solve by being there, you're also increasing that problem. And if you're not aware of that, then you just keep on going. But if you are aware of that, you can take that into account when deploying and when settling down. And what I learned there is that it is very good to look when you establish a base and how you can minimize your footprint. And here I think that green technologies can help us to minimize our logistical vulnerability. If we make this energy transition to renewables, if we use solar panels for our energy, well, I explained a new invention of how we can draw water out of the air. If you can make your base more self-sustaining, then this enormous logistical supply chain that we have now that we need to protect, which is our Achilles heel, which is an enormous cost driver, we can bring that down. And we don't have a big burden on the local population anymore. It makes the mission cheaper, and you can focus more on the work you have to do instead of supplying that work.
Right.
And so it's a win-win situation.
Yes, absolutely. The global military has historically been one of the largest polluters, if not the largest polluter in history. But at the same time, that gives it opportunity to revamp and to actually apply a lot of these science and tech advances and incorporate it in and lead the way and really showcase how operations can become sustainable, self-sustaining. And so give us a few more examples. This is really fascinating because you're really avant-garde in terms of where a lot of these tech advances are heading, and you're really in a unique position to not just see it, not just encourage it, but then also to share with where the military is going in that regard.
I think we now have a whole of government approach with the three departments, aid, foreign affairs, defense, working together. That's not enough. Because companies play a big role, NGOs play a big role, knowledge institutes play a role. So we need to have a wider kind of ecosystem approach. And a few years ago, we organized a Future Force conference on security. And we invited not just military, but we invited 1,300 stakeholders from all over the world. From all kinds of knowledge centers, innovators, artists, you name it, universities. And there were only a few military in the room. And we discussed different security topics, like mega cities, how to secure them, climate security, all kinds of security-related topics. And all these people have very different agendas, but they have one common thing, and that is that they need a safe environment to work in. And on that ground, you can find each other and help each other. And they bring a lot of knowledge, they bring networks, they bring means, they bring capabilities that they can bring to that table. And if you can create synergy in that group, focusing on a crisis area like Libya or like Mali or like Somalia or wherever, then you can create an enormous force that can help you solve the problem. And I am a believer in that. And in that conference, we offered defense as a platform for innovation. And as a result of that, we initiated several projects. But I give you one example. I was approached by a young innovator with a wild idea. And his idea was to solve the world's water problem by extracting water from the air. At first I thought he was crazy, but then I said, okay, let's try this. I'll give you an opportunity to test your device. And 2 weeks later he was in a plane to Africa, in Mali, in our camp, in the desert circumstances. And we offered him the chance to further develop his product. And he succeeded. Within a few weeks, he succeeded in extracting water out of dry desert air. Wow. Can you believe that? Wow. But it was very limited. So he got a follow-on project together with defense to further develop that. And soon, he will present the result of this, which is groundbreaking. He has built a device this big,
Right.
with one solar panel on top of it, completely self-sustaining, that can extract 20 liters of water out of the air per day.
Wow.
Per day. So that can help complete families continuously.
Right.
And you don't need to drill holes in the ground anymore. You don't have to, so the ground level water can be saved, and you can use that water to sustain the families there. Now imagine if you apply that on a larger scale, in the Sahel region, in the Middle East, if you apply that on cities,
Right.
what the impact of such an invention can be. And that convinced me that many of the solutions that we need are already out there. But we need to find them. We need to reach out, and we need to make sure that these young innovators and startups and companies, that they get space to develop their, and support to develop their product. And maybe only 1 out of 10 really succeeds. But that 1 out of 10 can make the big difference.
That
So let's
one
give
just
them
needs that opportunity.
Exactly.
And you're providing that for him, and you're providing
Exactly.
that opportunity.
Yeah.
That's incredible. And that is the opportunity that is unique to the defense communities in collaboration with private sector to be able to provide.
Yeah.
To be
And
able
we
to
have that, and we have that strength. We are very practical people, military, and we are very technology oriented. So innovation is something that's in our genes, and
the
we
culture.
we like to adapt. We want to be ahead of the game, so we can facilitate this change, and it also helps us because by introducing these kind of new technologies, we can make our bases self-sustaining. We can almost cut the whole logistical chain behind it because we don't need them anymore. So it's also an enormous win situation for ourselves.
Do you see any pushback? Is there anyone who would rather maintain the old order, or is this truly supported through the entire vehicle that is the global military? What are the challenges that you're coming up against? Are there barriers that you're needing to find also innovative, maybe just conversations or collaborations to overcome to be able to get to that next level?
Yeah. Well, there are several challenges. One of them is that defense and development, climate, we come from different worlds.
Right.
So climate was kind of a left-wing, tree-hugging issue, and defense is a right-wing, hardliner issue, and we didn't talk with each other. These worlds are now coming together. But that's kind of a transition phase, and you still see that the acceptance of that is limited. It has to grow. And I'm an advocate of that. So that's one. The second thing is that on the political level, climate change is a very slow-moving animal. And we are not sure of the impact, so we can deny that. And for politicians, they rather put their resources in problems that they can fix today instead of in problems for the next generation. So there is also a kind of a hindrance on the political level to take action on this issue. But I think that's the transition phase. It will come because the public pressure is growing. Everybody starts realizing that this is really an issue of existential importance, and that climate is no longer a left-wing issue and security is no longer a right-wing issue. Both are connected, and both issues are of importance to everybody, to us all.
Right. And you're saying how it's a slow-moving issue, but as you're saying, that is also changing. It's becoming more obvious that this is an issue for everybody. And also, we're experiencing impacts right now. And then reports have shown that we're going to be seeing the most catastrophic impacts within the next 11 years. Yeah. So about a decade away at this point. So, but that shouldn't be of surprise to those who've already been in areas that are really experiencing impacts faster, like yourself. You've been in Africa, you've been in the Middle East. Yeah. What was unique about those regions that really opened your mind and eyes faster than the rest of us had a chance to catch up, that we're now just beginning to see?
Well, we never made that relationship with climate change in the past. So these are very fragile countries, and there are many roots of conflicts there. You have failing governments, you have very limited economic perspectives, you have scarcity on water and food, and you have all kinds of ethnic tensions that are present, and they fuel conflicts. So we never related those conflicts also to climate change. And that awareness is now building up because climate change only increases the shortage of food and water, and thereby fuels these conflicts. So we need to take climate change also from that perspective as a root of conflict more seriously. and incorporate that in our intel assessments, in our early warning systems, so that we can see things changing and how they impact locally, and try to be more on the preventive side of things than on the reaction side of things.
And how are the communities reacting to these efforts? The ones that you have engaged with in your career, but also from what you can understand in the new role that you've taken on, how are those communities benefiting and supporting a lot of these activities that are underway?
It's coming, but it's still limited. It's in its early stages. I see that resilience is taken more and more seriously, because that is a direct threat to militaries and to countries. Also in the US, large parts of the coast threaten to be flooded by the sea level rise. Mm-hmm. So more and more you see that different states are becoming aware of that and are developing programs to deal with that. And also here in the Netherlands, we are 3 meters below sea level at this place. Right. And we have a very sophisticated defense against the sea, but it's only capable of dealing with 40 centimeters of sea level rise, which is this high. The expected sea level rise is 1 to 2 meters. So imagine the impact on a country like us, where 1/3 of the people already lives below the sea level. 1/3. So it's a direct threat. And that part of it is taken seriously, but the other parts, addressing it as a root of conflict and the geopolitical aspects of it, I think awareness is starting to come now. And I think it's very good that we launched this International Military Committee on Climate and Security, where we connect the militaries to each other, where we establish a network that can exchange knowledge, exchange best practices, and start building that awareness. And I'm sure that will create and improve that movement.
Tom, talk to me a little bit about your engagement with civilians and the extent to which they can understand, comprehend, appreciate the things you've seen and the things that you are working on now as it relates to climate and security. How do you talk to civilians and encourage them to also get engaged and involved? What can they do? Those who are listening to this podcast all over the world, we have listeners tuning in, and your unique vantage point from your expansive career in the military, specifically in a country like the Netherlands that has the unique geography that it does, that it's under sea level. What is it that you, from your experience and your vantage point, can share to those around the world where they can really benefit and then go forward and also do their own part to move the needle forward in terms of climate and security?
Yeah. Well, I think the key point is that we are all stakeholders. We are all stakeholders in our own security, and we all can play a role. And the issue is, especially when you look at climate change, that it's too big. It's very complex, very big, very far away. So everybody thinks, hey, what can I do about it? Let the government deal with it.
Right.
But I think we all are, and we all should be part of the solution, and we can be part of the solution. The example I gave about this young inventor with a groundbreaking invention is a good example of how one individual can make a big change. And if we all start thinking that way and connecting with each other to deal with this threat that faces us all, I'm sure we can counter it. But we need to reach out. And also the military needs to reach out. We are a very closed organization. We need to open our doors, and we need to interact with all these stakeholders, with the wider society. And I see that happening now. In our defense, we are now creating places for innovation on different themes. One of those themes is the future base. And the challenge in that theme is develop a base that is completely self-sustaining on all aspects, which is probably impossible, but it is a driver for innovation. And many companies are now looking for that space, and the military provides an environment where they can test their technologies, where they can interact with each other, where they can strengthen each other. And that's a way of making that connection with the outside world on a very pragmatic way. You can do it on a political level, but then it's very abstract, and people lose attention, especially the population loses attention. Sure. But make it very practical. So my bottom line would be, think big, think like solving the water problem, think big, but act small and start somewhere. And we can all start somewhere.
Excellent. Well, that is sound advice. We'll provide the opportunities from the top down, and then from bottom up, encourage those to really take advantage of those opportunities, be creative, get involved, and we're all stakeholders in it. So excellent sound advice for our listeners. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Climate and Security Podcast, and I look forward to having you back as IMCCS and other initiatives that you're actively working on progress.
Absolutely, we will be back.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Climate and Security Podcast. We'd love to hear from you. Please tweet me directly at SWETAC or the Center for Climate and Security's Twitter handle. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, write a review on iTunes, share widely, and finally, consider donating to the podcast from the Center of Climate and Security's podcast page, www.climateendsecurity.org/podcast, by clicking on Make a Donation. We will continue the series of conversations with the most prolific and dedicated folks in this space, and your support is greatly appreciated. Thank you, and please tune in again for the next episode of the Climate and Security Podcast.